It all began with a love so pure, so consuming, that it felt like the universe had conspired to bring us together. Igor and I were inseparable, two souls entwined by fate, or so we thought. Every stolen glance, every whispered promise under the pale moonlight seemed to confirm that our love was destined. But destiny, as I would soon discover, is not always kind. Beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect romance lay secrets darker than either of us could have imagined. Secrets that reached back before we were even born, stretching into the shadowy corners of our parents' pasts. My mother, Vira, carried a burden heavier than anyone could see. She moved through life like a ghost, haunted by choices made in her youth, choices she believed no one would ever understand. She had been married once before meeting Mikhailo, Igor's father, but it was no marriage. It was a prison. Her husband at the time, a man whose cruelty knew no bounds, forced her to abandon her firstborn child, a son she loved more than life itself. That boy, as I later learned, was Igor. And now, decades later, here we were, falling in love without realizing the horrifying truth. Igor and I shared the same bloodline. Mikhailo, on the other hand, was a man hardened by betrayal. He had loved Vera once with a passion so fierce it consumed him, but when he discovered her infidelity, something inside him shattered. The warmth in his eyes turned to ice, and he became the stern, unyielding figure who raised Igor. Yet beneath his cold exterior lay a man still grappling with the wounds of the past. His relationship with Vera wasn't just complicated, it was toxic, built on lies and resentment. They both tried to move forward, pretending their shared history didn't exist, but the cracks in their facade grew wider with each passing day. What neither Igor nor I realized was how deeply these old wounds bled into our lives. Our love, though genuine, existed in the shadow of a tragedy waiting to unfold. We were blissfully unaware of the tangled web binding us together, not as lovers, but as siblings. It was only a matter of time before the fragile threads holding everything together snapped, revealing the devastating truth. Until then, we clung to each other, believing we could conquer anything. How wrong we were. It was supposed to be the happiest moment of our lives. Igor knelt before me under the silver glow of a street lamp, his hands trembling as he held out a simple ring. "Kristina," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you." My heart soared. I felt like the protagonist in one of those fairy tales where love conquers all. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for us. The days that followed were a blur of whispers and suspicious glances from neighbors and classmates. Rumors began to swirl, strange, unsettling rumors about our families, about secrets buried deep in the past. At first, we dismissed them as idle gossip, but then the pressure mounted. Igor's father, Mikhailo, called him into his study one evening. I waited outside, pacing nervously, until Igor emerged, his face pale and drawn. "We have to break up," he said, his voice hollow. When I asked why, he hesitated, looking away. And then, in a moment that would haunt me forever, he muttered, "To be honest, I feel relieved." Relieved. The word hit me like a knife to the chest. How could he say such a thing? Had everything between us been a lie? That night, I couldn't stop crying. The pain was unbearable, an endless chasm opening inside me. In my despair, I turned to the only solace I thought I had left, a bottle of sleeping pills and a razor blade. As I swallowed pill after pill, tears streaming down my face, I penned a letter to Igor. It wasn't just a goodbye note. It was a poem, raw and bleeding with anguish. "My heart is a wound that will never heal," I wrote, "and you are the scar I carry into oblivion." When I woke up in the hospital, the world felt distant, muted, as though I were watching it through frosted glass. Tubes snaked from my arms, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. Igor sat beside me, his eyes red-rimmed, clutching my hand as if afraid I might slip away again. But what happened next shattered whatever fragile hope I still clung to. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I overheard a conversation outside my room, Vira, my mother, and Igor's mother, Aire. Their voices were hushed but urgent. "You can't keep lying to them," Vera pleaded. "They deserve to know the truth." "And what truth is that?" Iris snapped. "That Vera gave birth to a son who died, and Mikhailo adopted another child to replace him. That Kristina isn't even Mikhailo's daughter." I froze. Every word they spoke pierced through me like shards of ice. So this was the secret they had kept hidden all these years. Igor and I weren't merely star-crossed lovers, we were siblings. Half-siblings, bound by blood, yet torn apart by circumstance. My mind reeled. Was this why Igor had said he felt relieved? Did he somehow sense the truth subconsciously? As the realization sank in, so did the weight of my own actions. I hadn't just tried to end my life because of heartbreak, I had almost destroyed myself over a lie. A terrible, cruel lie woven by fate itself. Igor must have overheard the same conversation, because when he entered my room later, his expression was one of devastation. He didn't speak, couldn't speak. Instead, he collapsed into the chair beside my bed, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry," he choked out finally. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know." But knowing or not, the damage was done. Our love, once so pure and untouchable, now felt tainted, cursed. Yet despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to hate him. All I wanted was to rewind time, to go back to that moment under the street lamp when the world still seemed perfect. The storm broke with a ferocity that shook the very foundation of our lives. Mikhailo, Igor's father, had always been a man of rigid principles and unyielding control. But when he discovered the truth that Vira, Kristina's mother, had deceived him for decades, he transformed into someone I barely recognized. His anger was volcanic, spewing forth accusations and threats that left us all reeling. "How dare you betray me like this?" he roared at Vera during one particularly explosive confrontation. "And now my son, our son, is in love with her daughter. This is an abomination." His fury didn't stop there. Turning to Igor, his voice dropped to a menacing growl. "If you so much as look at her again, I'll throw both of you out of this house. Do you hear me? Out." The words hung heavy in the air like a death sentence. For Igor, it was unbearable. He felt betrayed on every level by his father, whose trust he'd always valued, by his mother, who had kept such a monumental secret from him, and even by Kristina, though she was as much a victim of fate as he was. Yet, despite everything, he couldn't stop loving her. Every glance at her face reignited the fire in his chest, but also the pain of knowing they could never truly be together. Kristina, too, was drowning in her own anguish. She tried desperately to convince herself that walking away from Igor was the right thing to do. "It's over," she told herself repeatedly, as if saying it enough times would make it true. But fate seemed determined to torment her. Whenever their paths crossed, even accidentally, she crumbled. Tears streamed down her cheeks uncontrollably, no matter how hard she tried to hold them back. Igor wasn't faring any better. Seeing her cry tore at his heart, yet he knew he couldn't comfort her without risking further wrath from Mikhailo. Their love, once a beacon of hope, had become a prison of sorrow. What made it worse was the constant tension in the household. Mikhailo refused to speak to Vera, treating her presence as if it were poison. Meals were eaten in silence, punctuated only by the clinking of utensils or the occasional muttered insult. Igor found himself caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to his parents and his feelings for Kristina. One evening, after another heated argument, Igor confronted his father. "You act like you're the only one who suffered," he snapped, his voice trembling with rage. But what about me? What about her? We didn't ask for this. Mikhailo's response was chilling. Life isn't fair, boy. You'll learn that sooner or later. Those words echoed in Igor's mind long after the conversation ended, hollow and bitter. Meanwhile, Christina made plans to leave town entirely, hoping distance might dull the ache in her heart. But even as she packed her bags, she couldn't shake the image of Igor's face, the way his eyes softened whenever he looked at her, the way his voice cracked when he said her name. It was torture, pure and simple. The whispers began as a faint murmur, but soon erupted into a deafening roar that echoed through the entire community. Igor and Kristina's relationship had always been scrutinized. Two young lovers whose passion burned too brightly to go unnoticed, but when the truth about their bloodline came to light, it became the talk of every household. Neighbors gathered in hushed clusters at grocery stores and bus stops, dissecting the scandal with morbid fascination. Did you hear? They're siblings, one would exclaim, shaking their head in disbelief. The judgment was swift and merciless. What had once been a love story for the ages now transformed into a cautionary tale. But public ridicule wasn't the worst of it. A group of opportunistic individuals saw an opening, a chance to exploit the chaos for personal gain. One evening, Igor returned home to find an anonymous letter slipped under the door. The message was chillingly direct. Pay up, or we'll make sure everyone knows what your family has tried so hard to hide. The demand was outrageous, far beyond what either family could afford without selling off everything they owned. Mikhailo clenched his fists in rage, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. This is blackmail, he spat, slamming the letter onto the kitchen table. Vira sat silently, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of her chair. She knew this day would come. She had lived in fear of it for years. As if the weight of societal condemnation wasn't enough, the cracks in Vira and Mikhailo's already fragile relationship widened further. Their arguments grew more frequent, more venomous. You did this, Mikhailo accused during one particularly heated exchange. Your lies have ruined us all. Vira didn't deny it. How could she? Guilt gnawed at her relentlessly, eating away at whatever semblance of peace she had left. In private moments, she found herself staring into the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. Her reflection seemed haunted, hollowed out by regret and shame. And then there was the illness cancer, diagnosed just weeks after the scandal broke. Some might call it coincidence, but Vera believed it was divine retribution. I deserve this, she whispered to herself late at night, tears streaming down her face. This is my punishment. Mikhailo, on the other hand, struggled with his own demons. He had spent decades building a reputation as a stern yet respected figure in the community, only for it to crumble overnight. His pride was wounded, his sense of control shattered. Worse still, he couldn't bring himself to look at Vera without feeling a mixture of anger and pity. How could you keep this from me? He demanded one evening, his voice cracking under the strain. Do you even realize how much damage you've caused? Vera didn't answer. She simply looked away, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. There was nothing left to say. Meanwhile, the blackmailers continued to press their demands, sending increasingly threatening messages. Each new communication sent waves of panic rippling through both families. Igor and Kristina bore the brunt of the emotional toll. Every glance at each other was tinged with guilt and sadness. Maybe we should just let them tell the world, Kristina suggested one day, her voice barely above a whisper. At least then it'll be over. But Igor shook his head firmly. No, he said. We can't give them that power. We'll figure something out. Yet deep down, even he wasn't sure how much longer they could endure. The tension reached a breaking point one stormy night. Lightning illuminated the sky, casting eerie shadows across the room where Vera lay bedridden, weakened by chemotherapy. Mikhailo stood by the window, his silhouette rigid and unyielding. "It's over," he finally said, his tone devoid of emotion. "There's no fixing this." Vera closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She wanted to argue, to beg for forgiveness, but the words caught in her throat. Outside, the rain poured relentlessly, mirroring the despair that consumed them all. The distance between Christina and Igor was both physical and emotional, a chasm carved by fate that neither could bridge. Though they tried to move on with their lives, their dreams betrayed them. Night after night, Christina would wake up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding as she relived moments of their stolen kisses under the moonlight, or the way his voice had trembled when he proposed to her. Igor wasn't spared either. His sleep was haunted by visions of her tear-streaked face the last time they spoke. Each dream felt like a cruel reminder of what they had lost, a love so pure it should have been untouchable, yet now tainted beyond repair. Their rare encounters were even more excruciating. Whether it was at a family gathering or an accidental meeting on the street, their eyes would lock for just a moment before darting away, afraid to linger too long. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air, words of longing, regret, and undying affection. Christina's hands would clench into fists as she fought back tears, while Igor's jaw tightened, his resolve crumbling bit by bit. Every glance, every awkward silence shattered their hearts all over again. They were prisoners of their own emotions, unable to escape the invisible chains binding them together. But life refused to grant them peace. One day, Christina made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't bear the pain anymore, the constant ache in her chest whenever she thought of Igor, the suffocating guilt of loving someone she shouldn't. Packing her bags quietly, she prepared to leave town and start anew somewhere far away, where memories of him wouldn't haunt her every step. Before leaving, she left a letter for Igor, folded neatly on his doorstep. In it, she wrote, "I will always love you, no matter how impossible it is for us to be together." It was a goodbye filled with both finality and eternal devotion. Meanwhile, the parents grappled with the consequences of their actions. Mikhailo and Vira found themselves forced to work together to care for Igor's young son, born from a brief relationship he'd had during his separation from Christina. But their cooperation was fraught with tension. Arguments erupted almost daily, each blaming the other for the mess their families had become. "This is your fault," Mikhailo shouted one evening, slamming his fist on the table. "If you hadn't lied about Igor being my son, none of this would have happened." Vera shot back, her voice trembling but defiant. "And if you hadn't pushed them apart, maybe they wouldn't have ended up like this." Despite their bitterness, there was an underlying current of regret. Late at night, when the house fell silent, Vera would sit alone, staring at old photographs of Igor as a child. Her fingers traced the edges of the frame, tears streaming down her face. Mikhailo, too, wrestled with his conscience. He often wandered into the nursery, watching his grandson sleep, wondering how such innocence could emerge from so much chaos. Yet, no matter how deeply they lamented, the damage was irreversible. Their mistakes had shaped destinies they couldn't undo. As Christina boarded the bus out of town, she glanced back one last time, hoping against hope that Igor might appear. But the road behind her remained empty. Somewhere else, Igor sat on a park bench, clutching her letter, the ink smudged by his tears. Love, once their greatest joy, had become their deepest sorrow, a wound that would never fully heal. The emergency room was a cacophony of urgent voices and hurried footsteps, but to Igor, it felt like the world had slowed to an unbearable crawl. Christina lay motionless on the gurney, her pale face almost ghostly under the harsh fluorescent lights. Blood pooled around her wrists and stained the floor, a chilling reminder of how close they had come to losing her forever. The metallic scent filled the air, making Iger's stomach churn with guilt and despair. He collapsed onto his knees beside her bed, tears streaming down his face as he clutched her hand in both of his. "Please wake up," he whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking under the weight of his sorrow. "I can't lose you. I'm so sorry for everything." Every heartbeat that passed felt like an eternity. The doctors worked frantically behind him, their clicked orders blending into a blur of sound. But Igor barely registered their presence. All he could focus on was Kristina, the fragile shell of the vibrant girl she once was. His mind raced back to moments when they were happy, laughing together beneath the stars, planning a future that now seemed impossible. How had it come to this? How had love, something so pure and beautiful, turned into such devastation? Days later, after Kristina regained consciousness and made the decision to leave town, Igor found himself standing alone in the pouring rain, watching her silhouette disappear into the distance. She didn't turn back, not even once, as if doing so would weaken her resolve. The cold droplets soaked through his clothes, but he barely noticed. All he could feel was the crushing weight of helplessness settling over him. His fists clenched at his sides, nails digging into his palms, but no amount of physical pain could match the torment inside him. "I'm sorry for everything," he murmured into the storm, his words carried away by the wind before they reached her ears. Kristina, though resolute in her departure, wasn't untouched by the moment either. Her steps faltered briefly as she heard his faint apology, but she forced herself to keep moving. Our love was wrong, she thought bitterly, her own heart heavy with conflicting emotions. But it was still love. The realization gnawed at her relentlessly, a cruel paradox she couldn't escape. Even as she boarded the bus that would take her far from him, her mind replayed every stolen glance, every whispered promise. When Igor finally mustered the courage to see her one last time before she left, their conversation was brief yet devastating. Standing inches apart, neither dared to touch the other, afraid it might unravel what little composure they had left. "This isn't fair," Kristina said softly, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay strong. "We didn't choose this. We didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Igor replied, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "But we can't fight fate, Kristina. No matter what happens, you'll always be the only woman I've ever truly loved." His confession hung between them, raw and agonizing, as though it might shatter the fragile atmosphere surrounding them. For a fleeting second, their gazes locked, and for just a moment, it felt like the world stood still. Then reality crashed back in, pulling them apart once more. As the bus pulled away, Igor remained rooted to the spot, drenched and broken. His final words echoed silently in his mind, "You'll always be my greatest love."